Hey everybody, welcome to our next episode of JP Tech Talks. We're just talking about HDR photography today. So we're going to show you all the settings you need to know on your Canon digital SLR cameras. That's what we have here at JP, is all Canon cameras. So I'm going to show you the settings on our camera, take a few test shots, show you how I frame them up, and hopefully you can learn lots about HDR photography. Okay, so today we're using our Rebel T5i. We have various different Rebel cameras at JP. Generally they are all the same. The 5Is are some of the newer ones. They have a few extra features, but primarily they all have the same settings on top as well as in the menu system. So for today's photos, we are going to be shooting in all manual mode. So you need to have your camera set to M here for manual. And then what we are going to do is we are going to set all of our settings to be consistent across all of our photos. So we want to set our aperture. So using the AV button on the back of the camera, we're going to set an aperture that allows us a good composition. So I'm not sure if you can see the screen right now, but if you look at the screen, you can see that we have a light meter right here. This is telling me that my shot has enough light because it's in the middle. So when we're doing HDR photography, we want to have photographs that are in the middle as well. We're going to set our shutter speed a little faster to create overexposed photos and set our shutter speed to be slower. But if you notice, when I'm adjusting my shutter speed, because the camera is still adjusting some settings for me with my ISO set to auto, I never can get outside of that middle. It will always adjust my ISO to compensate. So I need to first set my ISO to be a consistent number. So I'm going to hit the ISO button on the top here. So for you to see that, it's this button on top. It brings up a menu screen. We can select a whole bunch of different ISOs. So on this camera, we're outside, so we've got lots of light. So we're going to set it to ISO 200. Once we're ready there, we're just going to hit set, and that's going to save that ISO value into our cameras. Now, if you look, now that we've set our ISO to 200, now every time I make an adjustment to my shutter speed, if I push the trigger on our camera here, the trigger button, if I select it down just 1/2 bit, now it's going to activate that light meter for me. So now I can see those adjustments. So as I set my shutter speed to various different values, I can see it adjusting in that light meter. So traditionally for HDR photography, for what we're going to do at JP here, we want to change it by 2 stops. We want to make an adjustment so that the first photo is in the middle, and then we are going to speed up our shutter speed, or slow down our shutter speed to give it be 2 stops overexposed, take a photo, and then we're going to go 2 stops underexposed to take another photo. Now the problem with this is when we do our fast photo, when we slow this down, we want to make sure that our slowest value is still higher than 1/60th of a second. So it's got to be 1/60th of a second or greater. If we need to, we're going to need to adjust our aperture or our ISO to give ourselves more light so that we can have that low, slow shutter speed be higher than 1/60th of a second. If it's not higher than 1/60th of a second, we won't be able to hand hold our camera, and we're going to need to get a tripod. Doesn't mean you can't use a tripod and go slower. If there's a perfect situation someplace, by all means get a tripod. But for today, we're doing handheld HDR photographs because we want to be the quickest and easiest way to do HDR on the fly when we're out and about looking at the landscape around the school. So for today's settings, we're going to start, I'm going to go out in the field here. We're going to take some shots. We'll see what we get, but generally just make sure that you never go lower than that 1/60th of a second on your slow exposure. The other 2 exposures, the medium exposure, the properly exposed photo, and the overexposed photo, or the underexposed photo, will be very fast shutter speeds and you won't have to worry. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to do what's called auto exposure bracketing. So we're actually going to go into the menu system here. We're going to push the menu button, and we're going to scroll over to the very beginning. It's the second one in on all of our cameras. It says exposure composition AEB. So when I hit the set key, it's now going to give me the ability to expose my photos brighter or darker. But if I use my scroll wheel on top here, I can actually set to be a 2-stop automatic exposure composition. So now when I push set to keep that, now when I go into my menu system, now you will notice that there's actually 3 dots blinking. I can get the one in the middle, and it's telling me already that it knows what settings I need for the other 2 exposures. So now the last setting that we're going to do is we're going to go into our drive mode and go to continuous shooting mode. So you push this little button, looks like multiple pictures. Some of the cameras it's on top, but most of them on the back here in the drive setting. You can select through, but once you have the right one, continuous shooting, you're going to hit set. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to take continuous photos. So as I'm taking the picture, it's going to take 3, and all 3 of those photos are going to be the various different exposure values that we want for the picture. Okay, so we've gone back out on the field here. It was too bright for us to show you the settings in the sunlight. You couldn't see the screen, so we went in the shade over there, so I apologize if it's a little bit dim. But now I'm going to take some test shots out here on our back field and just show you the results that you can get with HDR photos. There's nothing special about this scene. It's not even really well composed. It's just a basic landscape photo. But what it will show you is the cool amounts of depth you can get in the clouds, as well as some of the neat colors that show up in the leaves and in the grass in what is normally a kind of a boring scene. If you just took it as a regular exposure, it wouldn't be that interesting. So a couple things. I've already got the settings on my camera. I'm still gonna have to readjust my shutter speed accordingly to what this scene is. So I'm gonna need to scroll on the top on that scroll wheel to make those adjustments. Some things to remember though, that slow shutter speed can't be slower than 1/60th of a second, or I would need to get a tripod from inside to hold my camera. Some tips though, even when shooting at 1/60th of a second, you still want to be still. And because we're using an auto exposure composition, it's going to take 3 photos right away. When we hold down the picture button, or the shutter, excuse me, we're going to take 1, 2, 3 pictures. That's going to be our properly exposed, our overexposed, and our underexposed photo all at the same time. And we don't want to move. So we want to have a good stance with our feet, and we want to tuck our elbows into our body so that when we're taking the photo, our camera's not shaking around all over the place. We want to make sure that we have nice, clean, crisp photos that are in focus. For today, I'm just taking one single photo, so I'm going to use the autofocus setting on the camera. If I was doing a panorama that I wanted to have at HDR, I would need to manually focus on one area so that it stayed consistent across all of my photos. But for today, it's super simple. We're shooting one set of photos straight on. Autofocus will work just perfect. So not sure if you heard that or not, but it took 1, 2, 3 photos. I'll come up real close so you can hear it. Because it's able to take all 3 photos, generally all of them are lined up, they're all accurate, and they all work really well when we go to our post-processing. I've already created the video online for you to see how to make those HDR photos, so hopefully you enjoy your time. Thanks for watching JP TV. Subscribe, follow us, all that fun stuff. It's so good to have your input on our videos. And I'm Mr. Wright. Thanks for watching JP Comtech Tech Talks.